What would happen if Deku had the Ghoul Quirk? Let's find out. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like this story. Also consider sharing this with your friends, this really helps. Let's start. He listens to tires making their monotonous hiss over a rain-washed road, and it's almost enough to lull Naomasa to sleep, if not for the lukewarm coffee container that he periodically takes a sip from. Normally, the detective's mind would be matching the police cruiser's pace of 1 mile per minute, but he has an equally exhausted underground hero to carry that burden for a while. Eraserhead's conspiracy theory had become his wallpaper, case files and newspaper articles covering every corner of his apartment. There's no longer any question why the man always looks so disgruntled and unkempt. Between crime organizations such as the Yakuza resurfacing and the Tokyo Ghoul turning Nisatafu into his personal hunting grounds, Naomasa is able to empathize. They shared intel for a while and came to a similar conclusion at the end, or one that they could both agree on, at the very least. The Yakuza had ruled the underworld in the past, but the rise and prominence of heroes shone a light in the crevices that they had crawled out of. All Might in particular chipped away at those corners, bringing those organizations crumbling down to the point that the remnants were forced to live under constant surveillance. The Yakuza had become a dying species, like a dangerous animal placed in the zoo. Which means that the Yakuza must be under new management for them to try and reclaim what they had lost. Chisaki Kai is planning something. Now, the underground hero and the detective are sharing a ride at the expense of Tamakawa as their driver. Their investigations have blended together, creating a joint operation unlike any other. If the clues gathered from each of them thus far are any indication though, then it's bound to come to a close soon. They narrowed down a location, a mask shop. The police cruiser lurches into an abrupt stop, jostling Naomasa from his drowsy disposition. While the detective had been dozing off, the distance between Aizawa's apartment and the mask shop had been cleared. Tamakawa, wait here while Eraserhead and I go in. If anyone tries to run or if a fight breaks out, we may need you in the car for backup. Naomasa plays off his grogginess by giving orders. Aizawa is probably so used to doing the same that he's able to see right through the act, but the underground hero keeps quiet about it, and Naomasa is grateful for that discretion. Oh? Why, you've got it, boss. Tamakawa reluctantly affirms his response with a singular nod before Naomasa and Aizawa step out of the vehicle. The officer is then left there waiting with dreaded anticipation. An eerie feeling creeps up the policeman's spine, since he's all alone on a quiet and desolate street, resulting in pale erection of his coat hair turning from sleek to furball. Tamakawa knows that he'll be reprimanded by Naomasa for misusing the radio, but he's desperate for some music to break the tension. The anthropomorphic cat turns up the volume on a random station, and listens to a song that he recognizes as Butterfly from Miyavi. However, the mask shop that Naomasa and Aizawa enter has no music playing through his speakers at all. The dimly lit store is so quiet that they'd be able to hear a pin drop. Nobody is there to greet them either. It's almost as though the building had been completely abandoned, with only disposable masks left behind. Neither Naomasa nor Aizawa know whether they should call out or not. If the store is still occupied, then it might be wise to approach the situation delicately, considering nobody should have expected an underground hero or a detective to visit. On the other hand, the atmosphere that they walked into isn't an ordinary one, and the element of surprise might be a good one to maintain. After a briefly exchanged glance between one another, Naomasa proceeds to keeping one hand concealed within his coat, in case he needs to draw his weapon, and Aizawa folds his arms close to his chest in the event that he needs to use his capture scarf. Once they are prepared for a potential conflict, Naomasa takes the lead in calling out for anyone else who may be inhabiting the shop. Is there somebody here that I could speak with? Perhaps the shop owner. The detective raises his voice on the second sentence just to be certain that he can be heard. There's a brief period of silence, a moment where the only response is none at all. Then, the sound of shuffling fabric is accompanied by a dull voice, "I'll be with you shortly." It matches the level of volume that Naomasa had been using. True to his word, what must be the store owner presents himself in the span of 8 seconds. What stands out about the lanky man with an undercut hairdo is the bandaged stump where his right arm should be. The gauze is red with dried blood. The shopkeeper must feel the gaze on his missing appendage, since he too glances down at it with mild interest, as though he too is just now noticing it. Pardon my neglection to what I hope will become new customers. As you can see, I was preoccupied. He gestures towards the stump with his good hand. A satisfied customer. Aizawa prompts the store owner with an amount of subtlety that makes the question comes off as casual instead of interrogative. It's not entirely disbelievable that a customer might lash out if they were angry enough, especially in a neighborhood like this, but Naomasa knows that the question presented by Aizawa is really an elaborate trap for the detective to use his lie-detecting quirk. The shopkeeper shakes their head, seemingly unbothered by Aizawa's remark. This is just from an accident that I had when using my equipment. It looks worse than it actually is. Naomasa is able to distinguish the difference between the truth and a lie, thanks to his quirk. No matter how monotone of an answer somebody may give, that explanation given by the store owner is registered as a lie. In scenarios such as the one he has found himself in, the detective is forced to make a judgment call. There's a likelihood that he'll procure more results by revealing his reason for being there, but there's also a chance that the more direct route of flashing his badge will hinder the investigation further. Then there's the additional option of telling the shopkeeper about his quirk, and whether that will influence the man to tell the truth, or, in most cases, result in a request for his lawyer or an attempt to flee. Namasa chooses to pull his police badge out, and holds it up for the store owner to see. We have reason to believe otherwise. I'm Detective Tsukauchi Namasa. He tilts his head in the direction of Aizawa, and this is the pro-hero racerhead. There's a few questions that we'd like you to answer truthfully in light of an investigation. It's a compromise. Namasa applied pressure by raising awareness to the store owner about his shared company, but also refrained from giving details about the nature of the investigation. The detective also disclosed his quirk for the time being, hoping that he won't have to share that information in order to get an honest answer. The lanky man's demeanor doesn't indicate any panic, but his eyes do widen momentarily, as a surprise response to the reveal of what he had assumed were two average customers. I see. Am I under accusation of something? Should I be concerned? The store owner slouches a bit to show the detective and the hero that he means no hostility towards them. Both Namasa and Aizawa relax once they see that the store owner is willing to be cooperative. Not at the moment. Rather, we have concerns and accusations about the kind of clientele you have coming through here. Namasa puts his badge away now that there's no more need for it. Like my detective friend has said, I'm a pro-hero. That's why I've been tracking the movements of a criminal organization as of late. It turns out that same criminal organization likes to frequently do business at your establishment. Care to explain? Aizawa takes the lead now that he and Namasa are avoiding being long-winded. The mask maker is no longer capable of maintaining a poker face. Finally, a burst of emotion cracks the barrier that was put up to hide an expressive frown. I suppose there's no use lying to you if you've been monitoring my store. He hovers his remaining hand over the side of his body that lacks the other one. You were right in assuming that they were the ones who took one of my arms. Namasa keeps his quirk activated during the duration of the store owner's response. When he's certain that the explanation wasn't a lie, the detective gives Aizawa a nod of assurance. That's all. They only frequented here for masks, but were unhappy with the product that you'd given them, and you were punished as a result. Aizawa tries to keep the skepticism that he's feeling out of his tone. The mask maker shakes his head as his lips pull from a frown into a small mirthless smile. Nobody ever leaves here unsatisfied with what I make for them. The smile levels out into a thin line once he's through being defensive about his craft. They were angry about something else and took it out on me, that's all. This next question is what will make or break the investigation. This next question will decide whether or not this mask shop is a game changer or a dead end. Namasa depends on his quirk to answer him honestly when he asks, do you know what they were angry about? The shop owner diverts his eyes from the detective's rectangular ones, a reflex Namasa has come to recognize as used by people when they are about to be dishonest. The mask maker recollects his composure, his blank face from earlier returning full force before he responds. Namasa doesn't expect the truth to come out of the now inexpressive man's mouth. Not entirely. Yet that answer treads a line that Namasa's quirk can't quite determine as truth or lie. Luckily, the detective doesn't need to ask for an elaboration. The shopkeeper does so all on his own. There was a little girl, definitely abused and possibly meant for human trafficking. That part is the truth, but she got away while they were here. But that part requires some more specification. Namasa has learned from the past that his quirk doesn't give an answer to half-truths. As someone withholds information while telling the truth, then it doesn't register as a lie. This drawback of his quirk is exploitable if anyone were to learn of it, but the store owner doesn't even know what Namasa's quirk is yet to be aware of this fatal flaw. Namasa has to tread carefully in order to continue keeping that a secret, while also obtaining the intel that he and Aizawa need. There's a natural concern for the safety of whatever child was mentioned in the shop owner's story, so Namasa uses that to aid his ulterior motive by asking, you mean the kid escaped from them? If it isn't odd enough that the mask maker hesitates before answering, yes. The stranger thing is that Namasa's lie detection quirk doesn't determine whether that direct response is an honest statement or a lie. The store owner is still withholding information, creating a pretense that's incredibly difficult to decrypt. There's something more to the story that the detective is being told, but he can't figure out what the metaphorical missing page has on it. There's a kid out there wandering the streets all alone. Aizawa's interjection is accompanied by the repositioning of his folded arms dropping and hanging down at his sides. The underground hero doesn't bother hiding the grim expression on his face, his worry for the missing child more than evident. Namasa supposes the hard-ass actually has a soft spot for children, which would explain why someone like Aizawa would even bother teaching a bunch of high schoolers. Fortunately, that emotional outburst does stay true to Eraserhead's ideology of being logical at all times, prompting the store owner to specify more details about the kid. I'm hopeful that someone came along and helped the girl. The shop owner quickly redirects his attention from Aizawa back to Namasa, otherwise, it would be safe to assume she didn't get very far, and the Yakuza recaptured her, correct? Both the underground hero and detective mull over that suggestive statement. It's true that a child's legs wouldn't be able to carry them very far. There is also the matter of being in a big stone maze. All the buildings of the city on a dark night would be impossible to navigate for someone younger than a teenager. Even so, the investigative duo have a good reason to doubt that claim. Namasa catches Aizawa's gaze from the corner of his eyes. Both of them are thinking on the same wavelength, each of them considering the result of the lie detection quirk. The masked craftsman gave an indirect response to the underground hero's question, making it difficult for the detective's quirk to differentiate his answer between a lie or honest truth, but it still gives an indecisive answer of its own. Either the store owner believes his own lie, or he's genuinely that hopeful that somebody helped the lost girl. Quick deductive reasoning helps Namasa make his own assumption though. He believes the shopkeeper knows for certain that somebody is helping the girl. Namasa slides a hand into the interior pocket of his overcoat, digging for his wallet, so that he can produce one of the many business cards that he carries within it. You make a good point, mister. The detective suddenly realizes that he never caught the man's name. Yuta. Pardon me for not introducing myself sooner. The masked craftsman bows an apology before taking the business card that Namasa holds out for him to grab. Namasa resists raising a brow in suspicion, his curiosity making a mental note that he was only given a singular name. There's no way of knowing whether Yuta serves as a first or last name, but there's also no way to confirm whether that is intentional or not. Yuta, you've made a fair point. It'd probably be best that my partner and I sweep the area to see if we can catch up to her. Namasa continues from where he left off as he gestures towards the calling card. If you remember anything else of significance, please don't hesitate to contact me at my office. If Yuta has any suspicions of his own, then he does a good job of covering it up as well. It's not uncommon for criminals to maintain a good poker face. It's one of the necessities to have if you wish to survive in their underworld. However, in all his years of law enforcement, Namasa can confidently say that the shopkeeper's vacant expression is the most unreadable he's ever seen. Of course. Yuta slides the business card into one of his pants pockets. I wish you the best of luck. Namasa tips his hat before heading for the exit, Aizawa in tow with characteristic silence. It's only once the two of them have made it outside that the underground hero raises his questions. Why are we taking him into custody? We have plenty enough reason to believe he's lying. Not entirely. Namasa huffs in equal frustration. It's hard to tell what he's keeping from us, even with my quirk. I think it's for the best that we take a less direct approach. What do you have in mind? Aizawa's interested tone betrays his stoic expression. Namasa waits until they've made it back to the police cruiser, not willing to take any chance that Yuta could somehow overhear them. At the volume that Tamikawa is blasting music on the radio, it'd be impossible. Tamikawa switches the sound off with cat-like reflexes, startled by the passenger doors opening, his raised triangular ears drooping slightly, once he realizes it's only Eraserhead and his superior. I think we should stage a stakeout here. We'll have 2 officers watch the store on a regular basis. They'll be on the lookout for anyone with a young girl. Namasa answers Aizawa without a shred of context or acknowledgement for Tamikawa. You don't think that's a little too hopeful? There could be several people passing through here who match that description for all we know. Aizawa's slouched posture sinks into the back seat's cushioning as he inquires Namasa with a gaze through the rearview mirror. The detective doesn't bother turning his head, he returns the stare with one of his own, still facing forward. Aizawa's demeanor doesn't look comfortable at all, despite the way he's taking up the back of the car. How many parents or babysitters would take their children to a mask shop? Let alone in this kind of neighborhood. Namasa notices his words of assurance are enough to make Aizawa visibly relax a little more. The investigation has taken a heavy toll on them both, but the underground hero looks as though he's ready to take any available moment to sleep. Namasa's rhetorical question doesn't go unanswered, but it's not Aizawa that gives the response. Not very responsible ones. Tamikawa inserts himself into the conversation. When his joke doesn't get anything less than a turn in his direction from the 2 others in the car, he supports it with an awkward chuckle of his own. Sorry, I just wanted to be included. What are we talking about, exactly? The officer's ears droop in an angle acute to his whiskers as he shrinks in on himself. It's nothing for you to be concerned with. Just take us back to the precinct. Namasa clicks his seatbelt into place while waving his free hand dismissively. Tamikawa had done enough already, a stakeout would be reserved for other officers. An exasperated sigh from the back seat returns Namasa's gaze to the rearview mirror, and he sees that Aizawa now has his eyes closed to complete the exhausted appearance he'd been working on. Actually, could you drop me off at the nearest train station? I'm going to visit Sir Nighta's agency and get his input on the Yakuza. So long as there's a child involved, I don't think we have the leisure of taking things slowly like he originally planned. Namasa now understands why Aizawa dreads the remainder of the night from the sheer volume of that request alone. It seems they were wrong. The mask shop wasn't the finish line. It was the starting line. The investigation into the Tokyo Ghoul and the Yakuza have intersected, but that doesn't change the fact that they've only just begun. Akatani's night had just begun, or so it felt like. He'd given Eri his bed to sleep in. It's not like he used it for much other than comfort anyways, but that left him with very little to relax on. Chalk it up as just another cost of his quirk, but Akatani is more of a nocturnal creature in habit. The boy-turned-nightly predator was used to going on the prowl during this time, but he wasn't about to leave Eri all alone. So, Akatani is currently left standing idly in his apartment. To pass the time, Akatani is left with only his thoughts. Usually, thinking to himself only brought up feelings of angst and self-loathing, but now he has Eri to focus on. He has no idea how to take care of a little girl. He's still practically a kid himself. Yet, this duty has fallen unto him. If he's an animal, then he must protect the cub that he's adopted into his dwelling. He worries about the Yakuza and whether or not they'll keep their promise. He's confident in his ability to fight and kill just about anyone, but he's not so sure about an entire Japanese mafia. Akatani snaps out of his thoughts when his ears twitch at the distant sound of police sirens. His body is tense and his mind is sharp until the sound fades. He never knows if the sirens are coming for him. He can only hope they're going for the Yakuza. The tension in his body deflates with a not-so-relieved sigh. While he doesn't have to worry about criminals and cops tonight, he does have to worry about food. Maybe not for himself, but Eri is a grown girl who will surely need breakfast when she wakes up. Akatani opens his fridge despite already knowing there's nothing inside of it. He does the same with all of his kitchen cabinets. He's never had the need to keep regular food stashed when he can't necessarily eat regular food without gagging. He tries to remember what tasted good to him before his quirk eliminated his ability to taste normal meals. What would Eri like? He supposes he can go grocery shopping with her after his shift tomorrow. He suddenly realizes he has to work in the morning. At least he works in a coffee shop with a bakery. He'll just take Eri with him, and she can have some sort of pastry for breakfast. It may not be the healthiest thing for a child, but it's not like she'll be having candy apples every day. At least, that's what he thinks. The sun rose like a flower opening, the clouds speckled around its bright glow fluttering in the sky like falling petals. A light shower washes into the soil beneath that shining flower. Raindrops are colored by its radiant beams, blushing scarlet and warming to tangerine. The illuminated clouds, still beneath the ethereal glow, fog up the sky like a mirror. It's the first thing Eri sees when she wakes up in the morning. A clear reflection of herself in the window that shimmers thanks to a glassy sky. The young girl's lip quivers as she worries that she may still be dreaming. Nobody has stormed into her room to yank away the warmth of her blanket. No one barged through the door to take her away from the comfort of her bed. It was the first time in a long time that she'd woken up peacefully. It seems too good to be true. Then she recalls the previous night. The boy who had rescued her from the people who did her harm. He'd taken her to this place. To his place, she remembers. Like the boy is different from the men who hurt her, this place is different from the one that horrified her. I apologize, it'll just be another 10 minutes. Eri suddenly hears the aforementioned boy. She contradicts her earlier feelings by cowering to the furthest corner from the muffled source of his voice. Her knees come up to her chest as she curls in on herself. She doesn't know who the boy is talking to, but she knows from experience in the other place that he could be bringing somebody bad to see her. Just in case, she wants to be as far away as possible from the door. Eri internally begs for the boy and whoever he's talking to just go away, but the voice only gets closer. No, I'm not sick. Eri shudders before she tenses when she hears that. The men who hurt her always told her she was sick when taking her to see the doctors. I'll be able to come in, it'll just be a little later than usual. The boy pauses and Eri is confused when she doesn't hear anyone other than him despite a response, "Thank you for understanding." Eri closes her eyes when she hears the door click and the wood beginning to creak as it opens. "Hello. Are you up yet?" The boy changes his tone and volume from what she heard just seconds ago to a much more hushed whisper. Again, he's different. The people she was with would have yelled at her to wake up. Since he's proving himself to be much nicer than the bad guys she was with before, she dares to open her eyes at least. "Oh. Did you fall out of bed?" The boy has hair the opposite color of her own, that hangs to one side when he cocks his head. Eri doesn't know if she'll get in trouble for saying she did, and she actually didn't, so she shakes her head to answer without having to respond aloud. The boy visibly relaxes at that, and Eri can't help but mimic him, relieved to know she gave the right answer. His gaze shifts from her to a nightstand where the candle he had lit for the night is long gone out. "Sorry that I didn't have a nightlight or anything to give you. Did you sleep well anyways?" When the boy sees her shrug, he has a hard time holding back a pensive frown. "I would have let you sleep in a while longer, but I didn't want you to get scared if I left you here alone." When he sees her recoil at the sight of his expression, he makes sure to quickly hide it with an assuring smile. "Plus I figured you would be hungry. Wanna come with me to get some food?" At the mention of food, Eri perks up a little. Her mouth waters and her eyes glimmer like a red opposing force of the blue sky. The little horn on her head slashes the air as she nods. The boy's smile becomes more genuine as he soaks up the radiating cuteness. Eri forgets all about whoever the boy was talking to earlier, unaware that it had just simply been him calling in to let his employer know about his tardiness, finally lowering her defense. Eri is about to follow the boy when he stops abruptly, making her take a step back. He glances back at her, and she worries that she may have done something wrong. She knows better than to run away, so she tenses up instead, preparing for a hit or worse. What happens instead surprises her more than anything else that has up to this point. He apologizes to her. Sorry Eri. I just realized I don't have any clean clothes for you either. It's just something we'll add to the shopping list. Eri has to hold back the tears that threaten to spill. Normally, right about now, the only thing that would be spilling would be her blood. She's so grateful for the kind boy in front of her that she wants to tell him so. Shyly, the little girl grabs the hem of the oversized hoodie he gave her last night, already content with it as a form of clothing, and not needing more. It's okay. Is all she manages to squeak out. That's more than enough. The boy's smile lights up brighter than the sun itself that greeted her this morning. Eri has to shield her eyes, so she doesn't see him extend his hand for her to take until he says, "We should get going then." When she does see the hand waiting for her to take, she hesitates to take it. Anytime the masked man's hands touched her, she feels lots of pain. The boy notices and is about to retract his offer, but Eri braves the contact and surprisingly takes his hand anyways. Each of them content, they venture outside the apartment. Eri keeps her head down most of the time, and the boy does most of the talking, but it's not a bad experience for either. The two take the time to become acquainted with one another's company at the very least. After a while, Eri even begins to respond with small nods or shakes of her head. It's a pleasant walk to Antiku. Unlike yesterday's bitter bite of the cold, there's a welcoming warmth that makes it believably summer. When they inevitably reach the coffee shop, the boy even lets Eri come with him behind the counter. The little girl is struck with awe once she sees the pastries on display. Rows of kerapan are met with stacks of takoyaki. Cases with cakes and cookies inside are just out of reach from her tiny height. Freshly baked buns and muffins sit on plates, waiting to be served and eaten. "Take whatever you want. I get a worker discount," the boy says, completely unaware that he'd be paying for it all if Eri really had her way. Instead, she meekly points at the caramel-coated apples, silently asking for one of those. The boy obliges and sets her up at an empty table with the candy apple. He also gives her some crayons and a kid's menu to play with, along with a cup of hot chocolate. "I've got some work to do, so I won't be able to sit with you." He's quick to say the rest when he sees Eri meet his gaze frightfully, "But don't worry, I'll be around this area serving other people if you need me." He doesn't blink or look away. When Emerald Eye peers into the red of Eri's eyes as he promises her, "I won't let you leave my sight." Satisfied with the boy's vow to keep watching her to make sure she won't be taken by the bad men again, Eri works up the courage to verbally respond. "Oh okay." And that satisfies the boy in return. He nods with another assuring smile before going back behind the counter. True to his word, Eri's table is in view from there. An older man with his white hair swept back and eyes closed, then joins the boy behind the counter. He watched the whole interaction from afar, and held his tongue until now. "Mikumo. Who's that girl you've brought? Is she the reason why you came in late for your shift?" He has a tranquilizing composure as he tucks his arms behind his back. "Yoshimura-sen." Akatani Mikumo greets his boss with a bow. "I must apologize. That's Eri. She's my sister." Akatani pauses as he searches for the right explanation before continuing. "I normally don't have to, but I've been tasked with watching her for a while. Is it okay if I bring her to work with me?" Antiku's owner gauges the two with a considerate hum. "I suppose she won't be too much trouble. She does appear to be well behaved." Akatani lets out a breath that he'd been holding in when he hears Yoshimura's verdict. Perhaps he'd done so too soon. Yoshimura adds, "If we have to fill seats, and there's no other tables available though, your sister won't be allowed to occupy that space. Customers are the priority." Begrudgingly, Akatani accepts those terms. He just hopes such a situation doesn't arise. Fortunately for him and Eri, he only has to work the morning shift today and not the whole day, so that lessens the odds. "In the meantime, I think I have an all-night coloring book in the back that you can give her." Yoshimura smiles when he sees Akatani perk up at the offer. "That'd be great. I'm sure Eri would love that." "Thank you, sir." Akatani returns his boss's smile with one of his own. Yoshimura disappears into the back to find the aforementioned coloring book, once he sees how happy it'll make the kids. He later returns with it, much to their elation. It's enough to keep Eri occupied for most of Akatani's shift, which is mostly just orders to go and not to stay, gracing the two with good fortune. Towards the end of Akatani's shift, a familiar set of blonde buns comes skipping into the shop. "Akatani. Akatani." The owner of that hair cheers the boy's name in greeting, much to his dismay. "Good morning, Himiko." Akatani ducks his head in embarrassment while trying to hide his blush behind the cash register. Only a few customers glance in their direction, but the boy still can't hardly take it. Even Iri shifted her attention from what she's drawing to them. Reminded of Iri, Akatani works his way around the counter to introduce the two girls. You remember Iri? He says more than asks. Of course. How could I forget such a cute face? Himiko hops with adoration for the younger girl. Iri shrinks at the attention, but doesn't flinch. Akatani figures she remembers Himiko from that night as well. Watch a drawing. Toga coos over the amateur art that's on the table. One looks like a cat, another a fish, but what really makes her squeal with delight is the one that looks like a cross between an octopus and a boar. The tentacles coming out of the boy's back is much too similar to what Akatani's quirk looks like. Looks like you got a fan, Akatani. Himiko's teasing causes the boy and Iri to blush. Himiko takes it upon herself to get better acquainted with the other girl, plopping down in the seat opposite of her. So you like to draw, huh? Me too. Mind if I join you? The question prompts Iri to check with Akatani first. He nods with a smile to let her know it's okay. Himiko flashes one of her toothy grins when Iri hands her a crayon, the color red in particular. Red is my favorite. Thanks Iri. The blonde already begins doodling like a child herself. Happy to see the two girls getting along, Akatani takes it as an opportunity to ask Himiko something that's been on his mind. Himiko. The girl glances up from her drawing to acknowledge the boy. I have to go shopping later, because Iri needs food and clothes. Since I can't really taste anything and I don't really know what girls like to wear, I was kinda hoping. Ew. A shopping trip. Count me in. Himiko picks up on what Akatani is asking before he can even finish. With a flick and twirl of the crayon between her fingers, she points it at the barista. I've always wanted to go to the mall in the Kiyashi ward. I bet we can find all sorts of cute outfits for Iri there. The blonde begins bouncing in her seat with excitement over the mere prospect of it. Akatani hums in both humble agreement and relief that he'll be getting a girl's opinion. He's not sure that he'd be able to do it without the help. But first, Akatani diverts his attention back to Iri. If that's okay with Iri, then that sounds great. The little girl glances up with uncertainty. Does that sound good to you? She takes the time to consider the proposition, not wanting to upset anybody based on her choice. Her tiny head flicks back and forth between Himiko and Akatani before bobbing in a nod. Great. Himiko startles her with a burst of joy before reaching across the table to take her hands in her own. We're going to have so much fun together. But that promise between girls causes Iri to blush with a twinkle in her eye. The glee is contagious, and Iri begins anticipating the outing as well. Smiling in content, Akatani begins to back away. I have to get back to work now. You two keep each other company until I'm done and then we'll go. Okay. He's surprised when neither of the girls pout or complain about him leaving. They really are good for one another, he thinks. Once the boy goes to serve customers, Himiko goes back to admiring the drawing of Akatani. Her toothy grin is complemented by a light blush. Iri, do you want to know a secret? The blonde looks up to see the other girl tilting her head in curiosity. As Himiko uses her red crayon to create a shape around Iri's picture of Akatani, she giggles. Only after she finishes making the heart does she lean in to whisper her secret, I like Akatani too. The next couple of hours go by with Akatani being none the wiser as to what Himiko is telling Iri. All he knows is that they're both blushing and occupying themselves with each other, and that's enough for him. It's the first time he's seen somebody manage to make Himiko sit still. It's the first time he's seen Iri open up to somebody other than himself. That's all he could ask for and that's all he cares to know or see. Once finished with his shift, Akatani folds his apron under his arm. Are you two ready to go? He asks the two girls while removing his name tag. Without hesitation, Himiko hops to her feet with the same amount of energy she had since this morning. Iri is a little more hesitant to put down the crayon she's holding, but she nods her head in confirmation. Akatani sneaks a peek at what she stopped drawing, grinning like a goofball when he sees a picture of what's meant to be Himiko. Now able to tease the blonde the same way she teased him, he turns on her. Looks like I'm not the only one with a fan. Iri ducks her head to hide a blush, but Himiko doesn't share her embarrassment. Instead, the blonde giggles with her same unwavering grin full of sharp canines. You dare attempt to use my own spells against me, Akatani. She feigns a tut before twirling around in self-presentation. Besides, who wouldn't be a fan of me? Akatani's plan backfires, having the opposite effect. He stands there like a dope, wondering how he ended up being the one who's a blushing mess again. Luckily, before Himiko can mercilessly continue her assault, Iri comes to his rescue by tugging on his pants leg. When Akatani looks down, he sees the little girl holding her hand out, waiting for it to be taken. In such a short amount of time, she's no longer fearful of his touch. He feels the warmth of pride blossom in his heart and gently takes her hand in his. Not wanting to feel left out, Himiko begins to feign a pout. How come you won't hold my hand like that? She crouches down to Iri's height and holds out a palm like a person trying to gain an animal's trust. Will you hold my hand too, Iri? She bats her eyelashes for further dramatic effect. Iri glances up at Akatani, silently asking for permission. Wanting to assure her that Himiko is safe, he nods. Having already spent so much of the day with the other girl, Iri puts her trust in Himiko by lending her other hand. The blonde grins ear to ear with glee, bouncing back to her full height. The trio then embarks on their long-awaited journey. The three of them connected, hand in hand, Iri in the middle. Himiko gets Iri to swing their arms together, as well as attempts to get Akatani to join in. When Akatani sees the hopeful gleam in Iri's eye, he has no choice but to go along with it. Where he draws the line though, is when Himiko tries getting them all to skip with her. He won't deny Iri the fun, but he himself refuses to skip. Especially when Himiko suspiciously has her phone pointed at him like she's about to record. When they finally get to the mall, Iri's eyes light up like a Christmas tree. She stands in place, all evident in her expression. Akatani can barely contain his laugh. He hadn't seen her like that since she saw the library he calls a house. Himiko giggles when she notices Iri's state of stupor too, giving the tiny girl's hand a soft squeeze. Which store do you want to go to first? Akatani worries the hyper-blonde is somehow passing her energy through to Iri via their hands like an extension cord. Unsure of herself, but still overly eager to explore, Iri continues her habit of checking with Akatani. The boy shrugs, not knowing which store to pick either. Hesitantly, he glances at Himiko, silently asking for her to decide. The blonde had been waiting for the opportunity with a knowing grin. Himiko starts to pull them towards some sort of clothing store, outfits for Iri first, food later. She shouts her executive decision. With that decided, the three wind up looking through clothes for hours. Well, mostly Himiko sorting through every outfit she deems cute enough for Iri, while Akatani watches from the sidelines. Himiko rolls her eyes, you clueless, as she tosses a pink top with cats made of glitter at Akatani. When he glances between the shirt and the girls, seeing how overjoyed they are about it, he hums in agreement. He'll never understand their fashion sense. As Akatani waits for them to try the clothes on in the fitting rooms, he's relieved that he didn't distract himself with focusing on what they're wearing. Since he was able to keep his guard up and let his instincts alert him to the man who's been following them around since they'd left Antiku. The hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stand up when he realizes they have a stalker. It could just be some creep, but his first thought is an alarming concern that it could be a detective tailing him or the Yakuza keeping tabs. He doesn't know which would be worse. Akatani figures now is the opportune moment for the stalker to be dealt with. While Himiko and Iri are occupied, he'll lure the person into a trap and eliminate them, as not to worry either of the girls. Akatani begins by straying from the fitting rooms only slightly, planning on leading them to some place more secluded, but not too far as to raise suspicion. Akatani begins to size the guy up. He's slim, which means he could be fast. Large circular eyes with heavy bags, something that could have to do with their quirk. Except, they also have a noticeably large mouth. A casual purple dress shirt and grey pants gives nothing about them away, and would actually help them to blend into the crowd. Akatani grits his teeth since he's having trouble determining their danger level, but doesn't show any outward signs of aggression otherwise. Not yet. Not until he turns this next corner and uses an appendage from his kagyun to grab a trash can. So that when the stalker turns the corner too, he can throw the heavy metal cylinder at them. Except, when the stalker does follow along, they aren't struck by the object. Instead, they open their mouth wide and swallow it whole. Akatani's own eyes widen almost as large as theirs. Once he shakes off the initial surprise though, he's quick to release the other tentacles that make up his predatory organ. Why are you following us? Akatani keeps his voice low, so that he doesn't draw any undesired attention. He doesn't diminish the amount of aggression in his tone though. He wants the stalker to feel threatened. The stalker does look panicked, but probably not for that reason. You weren't supposed to notice me. They take a step back as though they're going to flee. Akatani flicks one of his appendages so that it splits the ground and throws the man off balance. No. I'm not supposed to eat, he said just to follow. The man is in a full-fledged panic now. At least Akatani is able to garner enough information from the shouting to figure out he was sent by somebody else to follow him. Who told you to follow us? Tell me who. Akatani takes a step towards the man so he can start closing the distance between them. He also doesn't want to allow an opportunity for the man to escape. When Akatani's kagyun gets too close, the man makes an attempt to bite one. The appendages being beyond flexible, they easily evade the gnashing teeth. All the futile attack does is anger Akatani. Akatani's kakyukin activates, veins spreading from his darkened eye as he bares his own fangs. You like to eat, huh? The ghoul crouches as it readies to pounce. I do too. When Iri and Himiko exit the changing rooms, they find Akatani waiting for them in the same place that they left him. Iri is none the wiser as she runs over to show him the outfits that she's officially chosen. Himiko, on the other hand, smells the intoxicating scent of blood wafting off him. She grabs hold of an arm as they leave the store, nuzzling it with her head like an affectionate kitten. Tired from walking, Iri clings to the other arm as he carries her. Let's go get you some food. Akatani figures it's their turn to eat now. Nobody would believe the legendary All Might is the same trembling anxious man entering the Nighteye agency. Toshinori fiddles with the loose tie round his neck, tightening it, and then loosening it all over again. He hadn't seen or spoken with his former sidekick for so long that he has half a mind to turn around and leave while he still can. Yet, his conversation with Namasa replays itself in the back of his mind. That talk reminds him of what's so important that he took the chance of coming here. He needs to find a successor before it's too late. At the front desk is a familiar face, the pro hero called Centipeder on account of his head that quite literally resembles a centipede. A scarf wraps around the man's neck, owning the look by making it appear like a centipede's tail. Toshinori waves politely in greeting. "I'm here to see Mirai. Is he available?" Centipeder glances briefly at the calendar on his desk before returning his gaze to the fellow pro hero. He's currently in a meeting. That's all Toshinori needs to hear to have an excuse in order to back out. I wouldn't want to be a bother. I'll come back another time. He cut Centipeder off a little too hastily while waving his arms in a manner far too exaggerated to be a ling. Not at all. But Centipeder is quick to prevent the blonde from leaving that easily. He even stands up, in case he needs to chase the hero down. "I'm sure sir would be more than happy to see you. As a matter of fact, his meeting is nearly over anyways." He gives some assurances before gesturing to the elevator. "Feel free to head up to his office." Toshinori is about to decline, but one look at Centipeder tells him that whatever he says won't work. So, he swallows whatever words were about to leave his mouth, and he nods with a shaky smile instead. "If you insist." The blonde is a nervous wreck all over again as he steps onto the elevator. He starts wondering if he should have taken Namasa's advice and invited Mirai to coffee instead. Maybe a public setting would have put him more at ease. Then again, they wouldn't be able to openly discuss his search for a successor with potential eavesdroppers. He wonders if that'd be for the better. Maybe he should have started small and just caught up with one another first. To say the least, it was a long elevator ride up. When Toshinori does reach Nighteye's office, he finds Bubble Girl seated out front. She's in the middle of writing something when she pauses and looks up to see him. The blue-skinned girl brightens with a smile as she greets him. "Oh, what a pleasant surprise." Toshinori returns her smile, but not her gaze. He's too busy trying to see who Nighteye is meeting in his office. "I hear Mirai is already with someone. Is it okay if I go in or should I wait here?" He asks the question with the hopes that she'll tell him to sit and wait. He prays for more time to prepare himself for the long-awaited reunion. Bubble Girl glances over her shoulder, peering into the office as well. The glass wall between them hides nothing. Sir Nighteye is indeed in a meeting with Shota Aizawa, the underground hero, Eraserhead. The contrast between Aizawa's scruffy appearance with baggy clothes and Mirai's parted hair with plain office clothes is laughable. Nighteye happens to divert his attention from Eraserhead at that exact moment, taking notice of his new visitor. The stern expression on his face softens for a split second in surprise, but returns full force as he pushes his glasses back up the bridge of his nose. He motions for Bubble Girl to send Toshinori in before returning his attention to Aizawa. "I don't think it'll be a problem." Bubble Girl delivers the message verbally despite Toshinori also watching the exchange. A bead of sweat rolls down the blonde's forehead in disbelief and betrayal of having his prayer shot down so brutally. Slowly, as though he were moving through molasses, Toshinori musters up the will to grab the door handle. He treats the office like he's entering a lion's den, half-heartedly considering buffing up into his muscle form. He hears the tail end of the Shai Hasekai cease production on the bullets recently. I doubt it's a coincidence. From Nighteye once he opens the door. Aizawa raises a brow at Toshinori's entrance, but Mirai doesn't turn his head in the slightest. "We'll continue our conversation some other time, Eraserhead. Until then, I appreciate your cooperation, and my agency will try to show the same hospitality." Mirai leans back in his chair as he brings his hands together, fingers crossing. That seems to be enough, because Aizawa doesn't show any complaints. The tired-looking underground hero simply shrugs and walks past Toshinori with only a small nod of acknowledgement. Once the door closes behind Aizawa, Mirai gestures to the empty seat across from himself using his head. "Sit." It sounds too much like a command that Toshinori doesn't even attempt to refuse. The blonde is actually grateful once he does sit, since he's not certain his wobbly legs would have been enough to hold him up for much longer. "What brings you by, Toshinori?" Nighteye prompts him to speak next. Toshinori can barely hold eye contact for more than a second, as he tries to sputter out a response. It's been a while, Mirai. I'm here about. I've begun searching for a potential successor." Nighteye hums, whether it be due to musing for himself or an acknowledgement of Toshinori unclear. He then swivels in his chair, taking in the memorabilia that's decorating the office. Toshinori had been so anxious, he hadn't noticed it until now. All Might posters, statues, collectibles, snow globes, and all sorts of other merchandise covers every square inch. Toshinori remembers and understands why this news is so hard on his former sidekick. Mirai finishes his chair's rotation before digging into the desk's built-in filing cabinet. "Now that you've come to your senses, I'll show you who I've already chosen." He lets the folder hit the desk hard enough that it'll fall open on its own. Wherever he goes, laughter is sure to follow. Toshinori peers at the folder's contents, surprised to see the same boy that Nezu had shown him. A third year named Mirio Togata. The profile photo is promising. He has a muscular physique that should already be adequate to handle one for all. Like Toshinori himself, he's got blonde hair. A distinct face with a bright toothy smile. Still, Toshinori can't help but deflate more than he already has. He's not sure why, but he's not 100% sold on the decision made by somebody else. I would like to meet young Togata before making any rash decisions. Toshinori settles on a compromise. It must be logical enough for Nighteye, since he's nodding his head in understanding. Nighteye presses the button on his intercom, leaning close enough to the mic to be heard. Double girl, please send Mirio to my office immediately. Toshinori must show his shock in his expression this time since Nighteye explains, I wanted to be certain of his worthiness before recommending him, of course. He interns here at my agency. Toshinori nods in mutual agreement. It's a heavy nod, one burdened with a lot of weight over their previous disagreements, but it moves with an understanding. Tell me about the boy. What else about him caught your eye? He wishes to inquire further about his former sidekick's recommendation before actually meeting Togata himself. The thought crosses his mind that perhaps the reason why Mirai is so intent on this particular person is because, did you use your foresight quirk on him? Nighteye dismisses the slight allegation with a shake of his head, not to see whether or not he'd be your successor. He removes his glasses to clean them before continuing, the truth is, I saw a younger version of yourself in Mirio. His ambition, his smile, his sense of humor, even his power, already so strong, and he uses it responsibly. A sufficient candidate that's ready now, in case there's no later. Toshinori takes a look at the picture of Togata, noting the visual similarities between the boy and himself as well. It's important for a hero to have a smile that can put everyone at ease. At least, that's what Toshinori believes. He sighs, completely understanding Mirai's rational reasoning, but still not completely convinced. You said he already has power. He will already make a great hero. Why not give another person the same chance that was given to me? To get stronger. He clenches his fist and stares at how weak the frail skeletal hand is compared to when he's punching villains with his muscle form. There could be somebody worthy out there who doesn't have the means to be a hero, but does have the heart and desire. Mirai huffs, and Toshinori can't help but assume it's in disappointment. But Mirio is ready. He can become your successor today and be ready today. What if All for One were still alive? Toshinori flinches at the mention of the man who murdered his own master. What if he were to return tomorrow? Or someone as powerful? If you weren't enough, then Mirio would be. Somebody else who isn't prepared now would be a waste. This isn't an investment, Toshinori. Toshinori keeps his hand closed into a tight fist, returning his gaze to it. It's so small when he isn't empowered. It's a gentle thing, almost childish in size. Yet, it's clenched into a fist. It'll punch and fight for justice regardless of how strong it is. Sometimes the world needs a tender touch too. My master allowed me to grow into my power. I didn't become All Might in a day. Mirai opens his mouth to retort, but stops short when he sees Toshinori has more to say. A first year could be nurtured given time. A first year has a lot to learn about heroics. A third year has already grown into the hero they're going to be. There is nothing more that you or I will teach them that can change that. Nighteye frowns, but doesn't have any argument to challenge that. In truth, he's too dazed by the reminder that Toshinori can still be wise at times. He'd forgotten that the man in front of him had been his mentor at one time. It's enough to make Mirai cry, but he covers it well by pretending to be shining his glasses. I see your point. Is all he can manage without choking on a sob or risking his voice cracking. Fortunately, Mirio chooses that time to join them. He arrives in a sudden and theatrical fashion, head poking through the wall like a ghost. You wanted to see me, sir. He flashes his best smile. Teeth sparkle like pearls, and the glare from the sun reflecting off them makes it blinding. Toshinori is startled by the strange sudden appearance of Mirio's head in a wall, but Mirai is used to these kinds of antics. Yes. Please use the door this time. You wouldn't want to wind up naked in front of All Might, would you? Nighteye only directs his attention from the corner of his eye. All Might? Mirio quickly glances around the room, passing over Toshinori. Rather than explaining now, Nighteye thrusts a thumb at the door. You'll see. Yes, sir. Mirio doesn't delay or linger to question further. He vanishes just as quickly as he appeared. Once alone again, Toshinori raises a brow as he asks, naked. The drawback of his quirk. Nighteye rests a hand on his forehead with the temptation to drag it down to his chin. That may not have been the best first impression, but he also knows that Toshinori likes to keep an open mind that will tolerate such an odd introduction. It's just the rest of their meeting that needs to go well. When Mirio returns, this time walking through the door like a normal person, Toshinori can see the boy's hero outfit. A bright yellow number of 1 million stretches across his chest, standing out amongst the stark white of his top half. A red cape trails behind him, completing the Western hero look that All Might himself had adopted, with the boy's lower half being a pair of baggy blue pants. Mirio glances at Toshinori, staggers, and then stops in place. Wait, don't tell me. He snaps his fingers as though he just had an epiphany. I can see the resemblance. You're All Might. Toshinori scratches the back of his head, partly concerned that Togata was able to figure it out so easily and partially impressed that he was able to put two and two together. Yes, young man, it is I. He pushes down his worries and covers them up with a welcoming smile. Would you mind joining us for a moment of your time? Absolutely. It's an honor to meet you. Mirio bows to his waistline before rushing to grab a seat with his superiors. To what do I owe the pleasure? Toshinori glances at Mirai, wondering if he'll do the explaining, or if it'll be left up to him. When Nighteye doesn't say anything, the disempowered All Might relents. I wanted to see if you would like to inherit my power. He decides to just jump straight to the point. Besides, he'll be able to tell what kind of person Togata is based on the answer he gives. Mirio blinks once. Twice. The room is silent as the third year processes what was just said. Mirio then tilts his head, his confusion being too heavy for his brain. What do you mean inherit your power? He asks. Toshinori sighs. He figured he'd have to elaborate, but part of him was hoping he'd get to gloss over the exposition part of this. Once again accepting the role that was given to him after double-checking with Mirai, he begins to explain. All Might, the symbol of peace, has to come off as a natural-born hero. As such, I've never disclosed my quirk to the public. He stops when he sees Mirio massaging his temple. For a moment, Toshinori is worried that he's already lost the boy, especially since this is the basic part of the explanation. Come to think of it, there's only ever been theories guessing it's some form of super strength. But is relieved when he realizes that Mirio was simply coming to terms with the shocking truth he'd about to be told. Nodding along, Toshinori rips the rest off like a band-aid. The truth is, my quirk was passed down to me like an Olympic torch. Mirio jumps in surprise like he just received an electric shock, and he's now overflowing with loads of questions, but Toshinori holds up a hand that tells him to wait and ask those questions after he finishes. I have the ability to transfer power. That is the quirk that I inherited. It's called One for All. Mirio checks with Mirai, as though he's expecting Nighteye to reveal it's all an elaborate hoax. Toshinori is grateful that this prompts his former sidekick to explain the rest. The first person cultivates the power, and then passes it on to another. The next refines it and passes it on again. It becomes an everlasting network of power, saving him the trouble. This stockpiling quirk is what makes me so strong. Now, I wish to pass it on to you, Mirio Togata. What do you say? Toshinori chimes back in to remind the boy why he's being told all these secrets in the first place. Toshinori must admit he's surprised when he sees Mirio's smile fall flat. He would have expected anyone to desperately and greedily jump at the opportunity of receiving his power. I honestly don't know. This is all so much. Why me? Do I even deserve that honor? He places a hand over where his heart is, but the movement draws Toshinori's eye to the number printed across the boy's chest. Toshinori sees Mirai is about to say something, probably to alleviate the boy's concerns, but he holds up a hand to stop him. He wants to take it upon himself and use this as his own opportunity to see what Mirio is all about. Tell me, young man, what does that number mean on your chest? He points to the bright yellow font. Mirio looks down, seemingly have forgotten the number was there until now. When he looks back up, his face shows an expression of determination that wasn't there before. It's not the same hopeful smile that Toshinori saw earlier, but rather one with an actual drive to achieve that hope. I want to save 1 million people, he declares. Toshinori feels the corners of his mouth tugging upwards into a smile before he can even laugh. He can't hold it in, this feeling in his gut. He lets out a mighty guffaw as his body flexes into its muscle form. Pleased with Mirio Togata and finding the same sense of humor that led Mirai to choosing him as a worthy successor, All Might grins ear to ear. Young Togata. With One for All, you will save more than 1 million people, he declares as part of his acceptance of the third year. Meanwhile, Akatani Nakumo is focusing on saving just one person. He wants to protect the little girl that swaddled in so many blankets that he worries she might get cooked from the heat. As soon as they got back, she was fast asleep. Iri had taken over the room that had once been his, occupying the space as her own. He doesn't mind a single bit though. It's not like he slept much there anyways. Besides, he has much more pressing matters if he's to protect Iri. He doesn't know who exactly he's saving her from, but he's assuming it's the Yakuza. After devouring the man who had been stalking them, he found a burlap sack in their back pocket. It wasn't just a bag though. It's a mask, designed to look like a scarecrow's whorish face. It's no bird beak, but he doesn't think it's a coincidence for someone carrying a freshly made mask to cross paths with him, Iri, and Himiko. He figures the best way to test his hypothesis and get answers is to ask Yuta himself. He'll show him the mask and see if he recognizes it. If he's right about the Yakuza still poking their beaks where they don't belong, then he'll know who to kill. He hadn't really considered what he'd do if Yuta isn't associated with this particular mask, but that'll at least let him know there's some other enemies to look out for. Akatani shoves the burlap mask into his own back pants pocket while heading for the window. Based on how long Yuri slept the previous night, he figures he'll have enough time to visit Yuta and return without her knowing he ever left. He's just about to dive into the night when he hears something that stops him in his tracks though. He pauses and listens carefully. He heard what sounded like a whimper. It's the sound of a frightened child. Eri. Akatani bursts towards where she's sleeping with a boost of his quirk's power. Tendrils sprout from his back and pull him forward quicker. His uncovered eye blazes red in the dark void that surrounds it. When he crashes through the door, ready to shred anyone on the other side who isn't Eri, he's surprised to find no one. The only thing terrorizing the child is a nightmare that makes her shudder in her sleep. He knows that the commotion he's made will wake her, so he quickly retracts his predatory organ and covers his eye with his hand, as not to scare her any further. Eri tosses the bundle of covers off herself, kicking in a panicked frenzy. Akatani gasps when he sees the tiny horn on her head is beginning to grow bigger. It glows faintly at first, like a dim nightlight, but gradually grows brighter until it lights up the entire room. No. No. Make it stop. Eri screams with tears in her eyes. He doesn't know what's happening, except that she's terrified. He rushes to her side, wrapping his arms around her, hoping that the hug feels protective and not crushing. She squirms as she cries, "Get away. Don't." And he almost does let her go. But he sees the absent twinkle in her red eyes, and what replaces it. He knows that what she's afraid of isn't him. Her horn increasing in size with its bright glow must be her quirk, and he knows firsthand what it's like to be ashamed of your own quirk. So he pulls her closer. He holds her tight and lets her know, "It's okay. Your quirk doesn't scare me. It won't hurt me." He feels her head shaking against his chest in protest, but he doesn't stop. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to worry about losing me." Eri continues to sob louder than his words. She ceases her attempts to break loose from his hold though. She must still hear him, because she no longer shakes her head in protest. The tiny horn on her head recedes as it glows fainter, losing its prior power. Akatani just keeps holding on to her. He doesn't let go and he doesn't stop repeating that he won't. They stay there, huddled on the floor. Neither one keeps track of how long. Neither one cares. Eri cries until she can't anymore, the amount of time that takes seemingly as endless as it is brief. Akatani holds her the entire time, not wanting to ever stop anyways. Akatani knows better than to ask her about a quirk. He knows from experience not to pry. But he does want to help her. He knows he has to if she's getting nightmares this bad. So, he thinks of a place he hadn't thought of or been back to in a long time. He thinks of taking her there. "You know, Eri, I was scared of my quirk too." He keeps his voice barely above a whisper and as gentle as possible. The little girl unburies her face from his chest to look up at him, curiosity getting the better of her, surprise evident in her expression. Seeing her now, he knows it'll help her to know she isn't the only one who's had this problem. He makes his decision and asks her, "Would you like to know how I got a little more used to it?" It's a small group of people sitting in a circle of fold-up chairs. Some familiar to Akatani. Some just as new to him as they are to Eri. Most have mutation quirks that affect their physical appearance. Eri takes interest in most of them, and they delightfully wave to her, making her shyly recoil to hide behind Akatani's legs when they do. It's a quirk support group. A place to share your insecurities. A safe and caring environment with people who can relate. You don't have to say anything. You can just listen. It's the first thing he tells Eri to make her feel comfortable. He then takes her to get a snack from the vending machine and a canned coffee for himself. There he finds a boy who appears to be about his own age. The boy also looks just as sleep-deprived as him, despite the wild case of bedhead. "Hi. Are you new here?" Akatani tries to be friendly so he can show Eri how to be sociable at the very least. The indigo-haired boy looks bothered but answers anyways, "No. You?" Akatani glances at Eri, and then back up at the boy. "I used to attend regularly, but stopped for a while." He then gestures to the little girl in order to introduce her. "I'm mostly back for my sister." The boy notices Akatani's pause, raising a brow. He's not aware that Akatani still hasn't gotten used to referring to Eri as such yet. "Is the coffee also for her?" he asks. Akatani laughs, not entirely sure if that's a joke or not, but stopping himself when he sees the other boy isn't laughing along. "That'd be mine," he says while cracking the can's lid open to take a sip. "Can't live without it." Despite not getting the subtle inside joke, the boy still smiles. "I can relate." He brandishes his own can of coffee before adding, "I'm Hitachi Shinso, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Shinso." Akatani smiles in return. "I'm Akatani Mikumo." He gestures to Eri again, and this is Eri. Before bowing. "Well, Mikumo. Can I expect to hear your two stories tonight?" Shinso tilts his head like a curious cat. Akatani can't speak for Eri, but he doesn't hesitate with his own answer. "No." He stood on the edge of a muddy moat, studying his dark-eyed reflection in the slow-moving water. A light rain created ripples in the stream that distorted his appearance to the point of becoming someone he no longer recognized. He wondered to himself that if he were to fall in, would his friend Koch-chan, or anyone else for that matter, pull him out. Izuku Midoriya was 4 years old when he learned that not all men are created equal. Not every child is born with a quirk meant for heroism. Some are given powers destined for the opposite. For in a world where there's heroes, there must also always be villains. In Midoriya, little Izuku's mother, had prepared him his favorite meal for dinner. It was his birthday, after all. You only turn 4 once. Not to mention, in this world, that age is known to be a special turning point when growing up. That's the age quirks begin to come into fruition. Like a baby's teeth growing in, children develop this major part of themselves at this critical period in their lives. So katsudon is served for such a special occasion. The panko breaded pork chop and rice with onion-loaded eggs wafted with steam. The aroma was normally one that would have little Izuku salivating. In that moment though, the stench was worse than when he had to take out the trash. The 4-year-old had to cover his mouth to keep himself from vomiting, but couldn't prevent a dry heave. Sweetie. Inko looked up from her own plate having heard the sound coming from her son. Yet, she remained oblivious to the reason for the noise he made. The younger Midoriya was good at hiding his displeasure from her, faking a wobbly smile. Seeing he hadn't touched the food though, she did have the motherly instinct to at least ask, "Is everything alright?" "MHM. He nodded his head frantically like the over-exaggerated gesture would convince her better that way. Then, he braved a bite of the food that smelled so horrendous to him. If he was on the verge of puking before, now he had no choice but to let it all out. The rice felt like maggots squirming on his tongue. The pork chop tasted raw, and the breading ground his tastibids like gravel. "Izuku." Inko shot up from her chair so that she could hurry over to the other side of the table. Motherly concern had her checking him for a temperature and scheduling a doctor's appointment before he could try laying her. She hadn't considered the food was what had caused him to throw up. She had thought something was wrong with her son. She was right, Izuku Midoriya would have thought bitterly, had he known better at that time. It was unassuming at first. Initially, Izuku had only lost his appetite. The tastibids in his mouth had simply started to reject the flavor of his favorite foods. Not even his mother's katsudon was appealing to him anymore. Even the doctor's appointment gave no indication to what his quirk would turn him into. There, the examination showed no other symptoms. His quirk was considered a dud. If only the doctor had looked closer, then what happened after may have been different. Izuku made the mistake of telling his childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo, about his quirk. Compared to the other boys exploding palms, it was clear who stood at the top of the food chain. Young Bakugo scorned young Midoriya. What a worthless quirk. You could never be a hero with something as useless as that. Believing the lack of taste in his mouth was all there was to it. Much like the doctor, the boy was wrong. They would just realize it too late. "See, come on, Koch-chan. I can still be a hero too." Izuku desperately tried defending himself against his friend's shrewd judgment. Katsuki sneered like the other boy had just insulted him. "You think you can brush shoulders with me when your quirk is worse than something that'd be given to a side character?" He scoffed before being joined by other crude children in the classroom. "You're not even good enough to be a sidekick." All the kids laughed and ridiculed Izuku for his quirk. "You would have been better off being born quirkless." One of them had bellowed in between giggles. As cruel as it sounded to little Izuku at that time, neither child knew how true that statement was. In that moment, Izuku foolishly prayed to whatever god would listen that his power become stronger than it already was. His prayer had been answered, but not by God. Whether it was late to manifest, laying dormant, or there all along. The darker side to Izuku's power climbed to the surface. It happened when Katsuki scraped his knee while they were on the playground. Despite Izuku sitting on the sidelines, being excluded from the game the blonde and his other friends were playing, he smelled the blood. Having not eaten in days, he began to salivate. His stomach growled in starvation much like his mouth did. Unlike the katsudon, this aroma was one that allured Izuku to it. It was a scent better than any food he'd smelled before. No fresh baked pastry could compare. The finest steak served by the pro hero, Lunch Rush, wouldn't have been as appealing of a fragrance. Izuku's nostrils flared. Such a pleasant, sweet smell. He had to get more than just a whiff. Like a wild animal, Izuku viciously attacked Katsuki. He sunk his teeth into the other boy's open wound, fangs piercing the flesh. He could have torn a chunk off. Maybe even eaten through the leg. Except, Katsuki was quick to retaliate with his own quirk. A single blast to Izuku's face was enough to separate the two. In Katsuki's state of shock, rage, and confusion, he almost misses it. The deformity of his childhood friend's eyes. The red veins splitting outwards, cracking in a web pattern that makes it look like it's about to shatter. For a moment, he worries that he caused it. He thinks the explosion from his quirk disfigured Izuku's face. It's when he catches the glint of red eyes through the smoke of the blast that he realizes that's just the face of the creature attacking him. What was hunched over, ready to pounce on Katsuki like he's prey, wasn't Izuku. From that moment on, a ghoulish instinct had taken over. A drive to feast on human flesh compelled the boy to just dig in already. It took every ounce of willpower not to. It took all he had not to become a villain. Izuku hadn't given up by that point. He pretended to be sick in order to get out of going to school. Locked himself away in his room like a caged beast. He fought against his impulses all that he could. He fought to stay alive, as though he could overpower the ghoulish thing within him. He didn't dare tell anyone about the nagging temptation residing within him though. Even if it meant getting help from others, if he did, he was too afraid. He was convinced he'd be better off solving his own problem. For fear of being labeled a villain, he would never share the new development of his quirk. Not even with his mother. He planned to keep it a secret. The poor naive child, only 4 years old, didn't know any better. Izuku, dear. Himiko Midoriya knocked on her child's bedroom door with a reluctance. He had become somewhat of a recluse ever since the playground incident with Misuki's son. She figured he just felt guilty and never got over it. I know you said you didn't like it anymore, but it's been a while since you've tried. I thought I would make katsudon tonight. Wanna just try to eat it? It had been so much easier to solve these situations by making him his favorite dish. She didn't know what to do when that no longer worked. So she just kept trying. A pointless attempt to fix things, much like her son's. After he didn't answer, she solemnly hung her head. I'm going to make it anyways. It's here if you want it. And she gave up. She'd been so distraught that she became distracted while chopping the vegetables. The knife she was using slices open her finger. It doesn't matter that she shoves it in her mouth to stop the bleeding. It had already been spilled. A single drop on the counter. Blood. The ghoul broke down the barrier between it and her. Then it devoured its first meal. The monster used its predatory appendages to rip open the flesh and separate the bones. Its nails scraped at the skin and tore at the meat like talons. The creature sank its fangs into Himiko Midoriya and chewed even after she stopped screaming. It ate until it was no longer hungry. Only after the intense craving to eat subsided did Izuku Midoriya regain his senses. But by then, it was too late. He didn't even recognize the empty husk laying in the middle of his kitchen. The child's wails that echoed his mother's did though. The tears that hit the floor washed away the blood, but not the haunting memories. He remembered the red sea that flowed into the valley he had created. The crimson cloud of his eye doesn't cover it. It's unhidden from him. He only has his reckless behavior to blame for it. Henceforth, he named the ghoul Akatani Mikumo. The cat as black as the night itself creeps along the narrow top of a brick wall, its wet fur glistening in nature's shower as rain falls in Musatafu. A powerful beam of light sweeps down from above, momentarily illuminating the feline's depthless eyes, the void's bottomless pit twinkling in the harsh glare. The light then sweeps down and past the animal as quick as it arrived, a thrum of muffled turbines accompanying the moving illumination. The searchlight came from one of several patrol dirigibles crisscrossing the wet surface of a glassy sky. From up above, the city seems quiet. However, the officers within the blimp know better than to be deceived by a night in the Tokyo Ghoul's hunting ground. The ghoul is a silent but lethal predator. Not a pack hunter that howls at the moon like a wolf. It's more than capable of catching its prey alone, stalking such prey so stealthily that the tranquility is eerie. The officers know just how elusive this hunter truly is. To go this long without being caught proves as much. As one of the officers pilots the rigid aircraft, another wears earphones connected to a console that controls an array of audio surveillance equipment. The state-of-the-art electronics are channeled into a unit attached to the blimp's undercarriage. Just coming hot off the assembly line and primed off the experimental stage, the gear can detect such occurrences as a voice raised in distress or scream, often before visual contact. However, just in case, a pair of military-grade binoculars that are connected by a heavy cable to a control unit rests on standby. The bulky frame has several electromechanical additions that allow the lenses to utilize a modified infrared light, specifically meant to peer into the darkness. Only the best for the magnitude of this stakeout has been supplied to the officers. They had originally started by simply sitting around on the streets, parked in a police cruiser. When they bore no results, they took to the skies. A searchlight procures no more subtlety than a patrol car, but it does make whatever is lurking in the dark have a harder time hiding there. It's like switching on a big night light to expose the monster under the bed. The blimp continues soaring across the night sky, just beneath a rolling layer of clouds lit from beneath by the silvery lights of the city. Down below, a creature more nimble than the cat glides through the dark slick streets over which the dirigible had just passed. The creature of the night's destination is just as easy to miss. Among apartment buildings and the occasional supermarket or diner, a small structure made from brick looks to be tucked away in something of a small alley. The only sign of it not being vacant are the glass door and the red glow of kanji hung above it, reading close. However, the interior proves to be vastly different from the exterior. 9 lamps create a well-lit array of masks, the presentation having an appearance that would have one believe it all belongs in a museum. The night walker brushes by the displays, not even sparing a single one of the art pieces a glance. It seeks the maker, not what they've made. The designer of the disguises is in the back of the building, dwelling within the staff room. Supplies are kept in storage there, tool cabinets and hangars containing equipment that ranges from small screwdrivers to a large lathe. The back space is poorly lit compared to the front that's meant for customers. The sole light source comes from a single fluorescent bulb aimed above a workstation. Strings and wires cover the desk and make a messy workspace. That's where the shopkeeper sits on a stool, completely oblivious to what lurks in the shadows. It takes the ghoul announcing its presence for the craftsman to notice. Yuta holds an unlit cigarette in his hand, gaping at who's standing in front of him, but more so at what they are holding in their hand. Akatani Mikumo shows the mask maker a burlap sack that's been outfitted to be wearable. One of yours. Akatani's accusatory tone is vastly different from the friendly nature Yuta remembers. The boy's bone-chilling stare sends chills running down Yuta's spine. The emerald eye he's used to seeing is shrunken to a red speck and surrounded by a blackened soul. Yuta drops the unlit cigarette, showing his empty palm to let Akatani know that he means no harm. How did you get that? He nearly swallows his question before he can ask it. The gulp is reserved for afterwards, so that he doesn't ask anything else in his state of panic. I took it off the corpse of a guy who was following me, Eri, and Himiko around. Akatani recaps the events of how he got the burlap sack before tossing it into Yuta's lap. Now tell me. Is it one of yours? Yuta looks down at the mask that's resting on his leg. He doesn't need to see it up close to know it is indeed one that he made, but he humbly uses the excuse to avoid making eye contact with the intimidating being that's standing over him. Why yeah. It's one that I made for the Yakuza. The stitched smile is one that he had threaded himself. Yuta is almost too afraid to lift his head. He feels as though doing so would mean looking death in the face. The way Akatani had presented himself was akin to that of a king cobra using its hood to look bigger or a rattlesnake coiling up with its tail shaking. When he realizes he's still alive to be able to mull over a decision though, he's able to gather enough courage. Taking a deep breath, he forces himself to look up. Akatani is staring at the stub where Yuta is missing an appendage. The red orb is gone and the darkness is receded, his eye back to normal. He gestures to the absent arm. Did they do that to you? Yuta lets out the breath that he had been holding, relieved that Akatani is showing concern and not disdain for him. He then realizes the question that he was asked, anxiety returning full force again. Yes, but it's okay. Yuta gets off his stool so that he can get close enough to Akatani to place an assuring hand on one of the boy's shoulders. There's nothing to be done about it. Akatani's gaze hardens more if that's even possible at this point. The hands at his sides clench into fists, tightening until they shake from the amount of pressure being applied. They've crossed a line. He growls as his anger bubbles to the surface. He's a volcano waiting to erupt. Yuta sees this and squeezes Akatani's shoulder in an attempt to keep the boy grounded. Hey, listen to me. There's nothing you can do about it. Just let it go. Akatani pulls away, shaking Yuta's hand off his shoulder. You're wrong. I can kill them. Every last one of them. His eye begins to morph into his predatory state as he loses control of his emotions. I'll kill them all. Spittle flies out of his mouth as he begins to salivate. I'll eat them alive as I rip them limb from limb. Yuta frightfully steps back, taken further aback by the sudden change in the boy he had considered to be kind-hearted. Remembering how timid Akatani was when they first met though, he's able to find the bravery to not let that fear stop him from being there for that boy. Calm down. He spots the coffee maker he had turned on minutes ago from the corner of his eye. Have a cup of coffee, and consider what you're doing first. Akatani breathes heavily, not quite leveled out yet, but doesn't turn him down. Yuta takes that as a sign that the boy is willing to listen. He grabs the pitcher from the brewer and pours the two of them a couple of cups. Akatani accepts his cup, taking a sip of the tepid coffee. Yuta drinks some of his own, treating it like liquid courage. He only wishes there were alcohol in it. They didn't keep their word. They didn't leave me or Eri alone. Akatani breaks the brief silence with a more reserved tone of anger, and they hurt you. His eyes flick to the missing arm and then back to the coffee. Yuta sighs, wanting to drown himself in the cup of joe, but tries to find the right words to reply with instead. Maybe, but we're still alive. These are powerful people, Mikumo. As confident as you are of your quirk, I don't think you should be overly reliant. It's just not worth the risk. He hopes that'll be enough to make the teen understand. It isn't. Akatani sets his cup of coffee down, opting the object in his hand for the leather mask that Yuta had made for him what feels so long ago. You don't understand, Yuta-san. He slides it over his head so that it covers his face. I wasn't asking for permission. I already made up my mind when you confirmed my suspicions. I'm going to slaughter them. Then he closes the zipper where his mouth is. The rain flows like a river rather than a showerhead. It pushes everything that it comes into contact with downstream. All that gets caught in the current is swept away. The cat from before paddles in the soaked streets before finding a garbage can to cling onto. The ghoul that's much more resilient wades by, emulating this storm as a force to be reckoned with. A thick wall serves as a dam, the harsh weather crashing against it, but the sturdy structure not bending to its will. Beyond that is a wrought iron fence topped with spear points, promising impalement for any other force of nature. Even though the ghoul descends from above in a flash of lightning followed by a percussion of thunder, it is a whole other caliber come to wreak hell. Neither barrier keeps it from entering the property and breaching its security. Trees and brush conceal the traditional Japanese residence that it intrudes upon. Forested land hides the hunter as well. The Yakuza compound is a wooden collection of business office buildings, each of them a dollhouse to be knocked over. What was once a koi pond now overflows, the fish diving below the surface level. When Akatani enters one of the buildings, finding the interior just as decorated, he recalls those fish swimming down. The absence of the Yakuza means they too have hidden themselves during this storm. The tentacle appendages protruding from the small of his back large and heavy, he brings them down on the floorboards. With a crash as resoundingly strident as the thunder, the ground gives in. He lands in a metallic basement, debris following him down. One of what will be many men dressed as plague doctors whirls around in a state of disconcerted alarm. The black cape hanging from the man's shoulders blows upwards thanks to the updraft of wind that came on collision, their matching bowler hat flying off their head. Whatever expression they're making behind the beak mask on their face is not in reaction to the cave in itself, but rather what caused it. Silhouetted in the smoke is a monster, the ghoul's predatory organ shaking like a collection of rattlesnake tails. A single red orb glows in the midst of darkness, pointed at the Yakuza man akin to a sniper dot choosing its quarry to take aim. The creature's face is covered in leather, its artificial teeth permanently bared. The lipless mouth exposes its gums, damp from the rain and looking like spittle. The ghoul takes to crawling on its red limbs, zigzagging in a low-poised position that resembles an arachnid ready to strike. Then it does. The liquid muscles that make up its kagyun pierce its intended target. Each tentacle threads the Yakuza's body, wrapping around the skeleton embedded within, and then pulls. Flesh tearing, blood curdling not just from the victim's scream, and another boom of thunder reverberates off the metallic walls. More Yakuza come to check what all the commotion is about. A blonde with their chin-length hair parted to the left, a muscular guy with his head shaved, and another spiky-haired blonde in a yukata run into the chamber from one of many tunnels. The ghoul is only now realizing that it's entered an underground labyrinth. However, it wouldn't be the same as a mouse in a metal maze, not when the cheese is coming to it, instead of having to be seeked. The blonde whose hair isn't pointed notices the mauled and mangled corpse of their fallen comrade first. Oh my god. Their face goes pale even before their impalement. From across the room, one of the kagyun limbs arched over its owner and acted as a scorpion stinger. Before the bald Yakuza member can share the same fate, the still-living blonde jumps in front of him. Watch out. A dome-shaped force field materializes seemingly out of thin air to protect the two of them. It just barely does. The obstruction is the blonde's quirk. He grunts and shows physical strain when the yellow barrier cracks upon being struck. The second strike is all it takes to finish the job. Once the barrier is broken, the man in the yukata is torn into by the ghoul's liquid claws, joining his allies in a hell of anguish. Bastard. The remaining prey crystallizes his body so that he doesn't die immediately from his own stabbing. All he did was prolong his suffering. Akatani's liquid muscle embeds itself into the armored skin, the power of the strike pushing the man back and nearly knocking him over. You're the one who killed Sorimitsu too, aren't you? The bald Yakuza grits blood-stained teeth as he tries to pry the ghoul's appendage from his chest. Able to harden and soften his predatory organ at his own will, Akatani applies a little more force to overpower his struggling catch. Blood flows from the man's mouth before exiting through the gaping hole in his abdomen. Then he's discarded with a flick of the tail, body crumpling over somewhere out of sight. The ghoul spins in a circle, searching for anyone else to eliminate. When it finds nobody, it chooses the corridor it's facing to look for more. The creature bounces wall to wall, springing from corner to corner, clearing the stretch of hallway quickly. When it finally finds another opening of space, it's pleased to discover another living being occupying that area. This one is much larger than the others were. Thicker muscles, broader shoulders, and tall enough to reach the ceiling. The ghoul doesn't deem this stature threatening though, it figures this just means its next victim is Mirio. The hulking Yakuza wears a signature plague mask, enraging the ghoul. It wants to sink its teeth into the behemoth's exposed flesh, the black tank top doing nothing to keep them protected. But a fist the size of a bulldozer overkilled by added knuckleisters comes barreling towards Akatani before he can make the first move. He's forced to leap over the punch in order to avoid it, the metal gloves augmenting the missed strike preventing him from returning the favor just yet. When he lands behind the oversized man, he regains his footing immediately, readying himself to dodge or attack. An intruder. What a drag. The giant groans in complaint while spinning around to face the trespasser that just jumped over him. Akatani crouches low when he sees the mountainous man reaching for him a second time. Come here, you little twerp. But the brute doesn't realize he's just backed the ghoul into a corner like one should never do with a dangerous animal. Akatani's appendages lash out, slashing as a pair of claws. They slice through the Yakuza's thick fingers, the digits dropping to the ground with heavy thuds. Only then does the giant pull back their hand, but by then it's too late. After a cross between a scream and a curse, the Yakuza grabs his hand that's sopping with blood, reeling in pain. Akatani pulls the tab on the zipper of his mask, going for the jugular next. However, the British being manages to put the mass of his arm between his throat and the killing blow before the ghoul can sink its teeth in. Instead of biting the man's neck, Akatani gets a mouthful of the giant's elbow. The behemoth growls more than the animalistic boy who doesn't let go, regardless of missing his intended mark. The British barbarian uses this as an opportunity. His other arm free, fingers still attached, the Yakuza grabs the ghoul who unknowingly made themselves an easy-to-catch target. By latching on with his teeth, Akatani forfeited his mobility. Now the giant can use his quirk on the boy, having met the qualifications for activating it. The touch-based power begins siphoning Akatani's stamina. Akatani can feel his vitality being stolen, his strength to struggle against the Yakuza's grip lessening. Meanwhile, the muscular man increases in size, veins bulging as they pump pure power into his system. Unharmed, but disoriented, Akatani twists for leverage some more. Despite maneuvering to free himself, he still can't muster enough energy to do so. That must not be enough to satisfy the Yakuza. The giant wants to pay the boy back with equal pain. So the Yakuza puffs and draws his anaconda arms tight around Akatani's waist until he's able to clasp his own wrist. You should have known better to pick a fight with me, kid. The beat brute breathes into the ghoul's face. The ghoul hisses as it pushes down against the elephantine forearms, but the grip remains locked. Seeing there's still some fight left in his opponent, the Yakuza squeezes tighter. Akatani wants to argue that the instigator was the shy Hasekai, but having the air forced from his lungs, the only comeback he manages is another shrill seethed through his bare teeth. The Yakuza isn't the only one who can regain their stamina by taking from others though. The ghoul bites into one of the biceps attached to the arms that are currently crushing it in a bear hug. Except this time, instead of keeping his teeth embedded or releasing, he viciously whips his head back with immense force. The motion rips a chunk of flesh from the giant's equally ginormous arm. The ghoul then swallows it, barely bothering to chew. The humongous hulk roars in a cross between agony and rage, but doesn't loosen his hold. They'll come to regret that when the ghoul goes for seconds, and thirds, a fourth bite, a fifth. When Akatani finishes ripping a sixth piece of meat from the Yakuza's chunky arms, that's finally when the Goliath has enough. He lets go of the boy cannibalizing him, never ceasing his anguished screams. Free from the giant's grasp at last, Akatani performs a backflip to put space between the two of them. Akatani lands, one hand to the ground, ready to spring back into action already. The Yakuza staggers a step, but otherwise flexes with the adrenaline pumping through him. Neither spare another second. They're both running on a cocktail of bloodlust and vim vigor. They come at each other swinging. Akatani blocks the giant's thick arm before slamming a right hook into their plate mask. The Goliath keeps his skull pointed straight ahead, not even turning to absorb the impact. Wrapping his beefy arms around Akatani, the giant tries to overpower and tackle the much smaller being. The ghoul holds its ground, pressing its hands against the wide shoulders of its larger quarry and pushing. Tendrils slam into the ground and stab themselves into the Yakuza, providing that extra shove. Each male strains, trying to force the other back and prove themselves the alpha. Neither would bend, but the ghoul's conviction proves greater, aiding in its efforts. The soles of the Yakuza's oversized shoes would soon be scraping along the ground. The Yakuza yells as he starts to lose the grudge match, realizing he'll have to forfeit it or lose. Maintaining his grip, the giant hurls them both sideways, bringing them crashing to the ground. They roll, and the massive man uses his greater weight to force Akatani beneath him. Holding his enemy in place with one elephantine arm, he pounds away with the other. The first punch catches Akatani's nose and bounces the back of his skull against the ground. It only made the ghoul angrier, outmatching the Yakuza in that regard at the very least. After that, each time a fist came down, Akatani twisted his head out of the way and jabbed. Alternating his left and his right, he connected 4 times for every one of the behemoth's glancing attacks. When the gargantuan Goliath picked up speed, the ghoul matched him. Finally, that beak started to split, the skull beyond turning this way and that. Realizing he was losing, the Yakuza tried attacking with both hands. Seizing the opening, Akatani folded his knees to his chest and shoved his feet into the man's abdomen. Sure enough, that hefty torso rose. Free of the weight, Akatani manages a backward somersault with the help of his extra limbs. Before the Yakuza enforcer can raise his mighty arms to block, Akatani lands a solid slash across his chest. The tank top rips in half, exposing the man's bare chest. They go at one another for one final round, this one a wreck, both of them welling with bruises. 2 feral animals tear into each other, punching and kicking as they brawl, no longer caring what they hit, as long as they hit something. The ghoul coils itself around the massive man, constricting its tails and giving the Yakuza a taste of his own suffocating medicine. Losing his advantage, the bigger being succumbs to the beating and drops to one knee. A final whip from one of the ghoul's tails strikes the giant's head harder than a gator's would have. His huge form rocks one way and then the other. He reaches desperately with a fingerless hand for one of the hallways, crawling towards it only an inch before landing face down. The ghoul senses other presences coming from that direction, raising its head. Indeed, 2 newcomers step into the ring. Did you see that, Chronostasis? This guy looks like the real deal. He brought down Katsukin. Another beak bastard gleefully slams his brass knuckles together. The one he was talking to, Chronostasis, wears a white raincoat with the HUD drawn up. It shielded him from the blood splatters, tiny red specks evident on the fabric. Don't get carried away, Rappa. He only gets halfway through warning his comrade before a tentacle from the ghoul thrashes him. Slammed with immense force into the wall, ceiling, and then ground, he's broken like a pinata with intestines pouring out instead of candy. Rappa bursts into laughter, not seeming to care for the grotesque murder of his partner. He's too fired up by the prospect of fighting the opponent in front of him to care. Oh yeah. Finally, someone to fight who I can stake my life on the line with. He celebrates prematurely before rushing at the ghoul with all of his eagerness. Give me the thrill that I seek. Satisfy me. Akatani doesn't budge from his position to kill this one either. He lets the resilient appendages that make up his predatory organ do all the work. Flexible with the flow smooth as water, they wrap around Rappa's arms before he can wind them up for a punch. Firm that they can be pulled and sturdy that they can't be pushed against, the Yakuza is snared. The tendrils then pull in opposing directions. Rappa would have screamed as he was torn in half, if not for the Kagyun chopping his head off first. The ghoul stays crouched on all fours for a moment, catching its breath after its grudge match with the mammoth of a man it brought down. It won't waste time waiting though. It doesn't want to take a break. It wants to break. The tendrils of its Kagyun laid themselves flat on the ground, drilling past the covering and digging into the dirt. The pedipalps serve as sensory organs now, feeling for vibrations beneath the floor's surface. Acute sensitivity allows them to perceive the footfalls of someone no matter the distance. It seeks a knowledge through feeling to find where the remaining Yakuza are, and learns what direction to go in. Removing its tentacles from the floor first, the ghoul primes itself to hunt. Then bolts down the corridor it knows has more prey. The tendrils that sensitively felt for it now become sturdy footholds for it to bound across the halls. The predator salivates at the corners of its mouth as it draws closer to the Yumi Yakuza. Another plague mask, this one white, identifies the being as short as Eri. It's another one of those beak Yakuza bastards. Their black bodysuit does nothing to protect them from the ghoul's bite. It comes out of nowhere, the prey foreseeing its sudden demise. Its jaw strength as strong as an alligator's element of surprise, shreds the man in half. It's a sudden strike with an immense bite force, not unlike the land lizard surprising a gazelle. Or in this case, a buzzard. The Yakuza lets out an ear-piercing cry as they're torn in half. The scream alerts a long-haired man despite their drunken state. The alcoholic staggers, letting the beer bottles in their hands fall from their grasp. Not because of how plastered they are, but because of the gruesome instantaneous murder they just witnessed. Akatani can tell there's a horrified expression behind the plain masks they have on, the fitted reins serving as eyeholes, letting him see how white they are. For a fleeting moment, Akatani feels a sensation of vertigo, like he's the one who's buzzed. It doesn't stop him from taking out the long-haired man too though. Once he does, the dizziness fades. After that fast-feeding frenzy, it almost doesn't stop there. Especially with the personal vendetta it has against the remaining beak Yakuza. The ghoul has enough self-restraint to stop itself though. It wants this final one to suffer a little more than the others first. The leader of the Shai Hasekai stares at the mess Akatani has made with bewildered disgust. His green bomber jacket is speckled with blood from his subordinates, making him discard it in a germophobic panic. The surgical face mask Akatani had seen him in last has been replaced by a magenta bird beak embroidered with gold. Yuta was right when he said the distinguishing feature was a pretentious one. Boy. The Yakuza leader seethes in rage. Just what do you think you're doing? Akatani grinds his fingernails against the ground, wishing they were sharpened claws that he could use to rip the man's throat out. He figures he'll just have to settle for his Kagyun. What anybody does when they're hungry. I'm eating. The ghoul snarls like a rabid animal. The Yakuza leader squints like he's staring at the most unsightly thing he's ever laid eyes on. Bullets. Then he calls for his disposable shoulders to deal with it. Imagine his surprise when they don't come. The pawns have already been eliminated. If this were a game of chess, Akatani would have beaten him in it worse than he did when they played Go. I kept you for last, main course. Akatani taunts and titters, don't worry. I saved my appetite. The repulsed man eyes the gleeful boy warily, reaching for one of the gloves covering his hands. The Yakuza leader's hands are his weapons. Like a gun, if he can just pull the trigger, he might stand a chance against the ghoul. I should have disposed of you back then. He regrets allowing the monster to hunt him down in his own home. Even with all of his devoted followers, he's left to face the rising star of villainy. The Yakuza was supposed to rise up from the underground, not you. He has no choice but to challenge that power with his own. The ghoul returns the threat with its own, lifting the appendages that are now its forelimbs, the unzipped mask displaying its fangs. The tails are a blur. The impact with what they lash out at, however, has more substance. Their intended target was able to use his quirk before they made it to him. The floor shifts like tectonic plates during an earthquake, a makeshift wall jutting out from the ground. That's what gets obliterated by the force of the ghoul's predatory organ, instead of the Yakuza boss. Akatani lands stationary on a hexagonal piece of the ground, then ricochets off of it, heading for the Yakuza leader himself. He gets close, but that's all. A makeshift spire from shards of the ground reaches up to intersect the ghoul's path, deflecting the intended attack. One of the boy's limbs whips across the spike, severing it before it can sever him. The beat crime lord slaps his other hand down, his fingers first creating a ripple, before the floor lifts upwards, as a giant wave comes crashing towards Akatani. The ghoul surfs it, riding the wall as it pushes him back. When the shield begins protruding spikes like the one he'd broken earlier, Akatani starts ascending it. The appendages are moving, mirroring and imitating Akatani's every gesture. They respond not only to mental commands, but by pure instinct. The limbs are an extension of the ghoul's mind. They effortlessly defend against the spires while simultaneously destroying them. The arms shatter the barrier between them and their prey, pursuing the Yakuza leader relentlessly. Akatani's opponent continues to modify the ground, reshaping the area in a way that separates them from one another. When manipulating the surroundings to keep the ghoul at bay doesn't work, the young head of the Shai Hasekai uses it to maneuver himself in order to flee. Akatani anchors himself to the ceiling, avoiding the controllable surface below and changing tactics. Two stone spears shoot for where the ghoul was, but he's no longer there. He's swinging from the limbs that attach themselves to the ceiling, moving at a much faster pace than before. The Kagian rips loose from the roof, sending the ghoul into a freefall. One of the flexible limbs solidifies, swinging like a sword. The Yakuza leader shrieks in both pain and indignation, as his left hand is torn off from his arm. The sight of his own blood causes the germaphobe to break out into hives, but he's already reeling from the loss of a limb. The pullback causes him to misstep and fall over the ledge of his own makeshift tower. Both fighters flailing through the air, they plummet towards the demise of jagged points jutting out from the ground. The ghoul reacts with its limbs once more. The wall to his right shatters, pounded apart by the impact of those tentacles. Debris rains down with them now, making for floating stepping stones to not only slow the fall, but to get nearer to the Yakuza boss. Akatani's tentacles descend on their victim, stabbing through his stomach and lower left thigh. He cries out in agony again, but this time reacts with a vengeance. The hand that's still attached grabs onto one of the ghoul's liquid muscles. Once caught in his grasp, the Overhaul ability of the beaked villain is able to disassemble the appendage. Akatani's blood bursts forth and the remains of the tail retracts in a wagging frenzy. The prey shoves his uncaptured leg into the predator's gut, pushing off in order to escape. Akatani screams with his enemy as they break apart. The Yakuza places his remaining hand over his chest, clenching through the fabric of his shirt. Then using his quirk on himself, he reassembles his molecules to heal. The process is extremely painful for him, but his missing hand returns and the two holes in his body are filled by the time he's about to smack against the floor beneath him. Akatani stabs the tower nearest to him, sliding to a stop before he can collide with the pointed peril at the bottom. He looks up to see his enemy has also made contact with the tower, his quirk aiding him in charging up the side of it. The ghoul roars as rage overtakes it, its viscous tentacles hauling it up and after the Yakuza. A high-speed pursuit ensues as they race to climb up the pillar. Seeing the animalistic boy gaining on him, the Yakuza extends the tower's length. It grows higher and higher, becoming tall enough to pass through the metal sheeting of the underground base, and straight through the wooden structure above it. In an effort to escape hell, the villain reaches desperately for the heavens. The demon chasing after him won't allow that to happen though. Akatani stops climbing the structure, coming up with a different plan to catch the beaked bastard who's taking flight just like an actual bird. He decides it's easier to chop the pillar down, as though it were a tree to tear down, instead of trying to reach those same heights. The ghoul's tentacles smash this way and that, sending pieces of the tower flying. It crumbles before giving way to the onslaught, bending as it's put off balance. Akatani perches himself on the top of what's left over once it topples. He watches as the rest timbers downwards. Riding it down is the Yakuza leader, yelling as he tries to cling to it. The collision of the stone on top of the wood sends splinters and pebbles flying skywards, nearly pelting against Akatani. He slides down the side of the slippery slope, raptorial tendrils slithering behind him. Just as he's about to touch the ground, those same limbs push off the pillar to gain air. Akatani sails overhead before catching a piece of the foundation with his hand. With one fluid motion, he spins skyward before landing on his feet. Sprawled out at those feet lies the fallen leader of the Shai Hasekai. The magenta beak that would be covering his face is cast to the side, straps torn and corners chipped. A horrifying human expression is covered in ash, soot, hives, and blood. Anger contorted with terror leaks out with the sweat. Akatani sees why when he tries looking for the rest of the Yakuza boss. The lower half of the man's body is separated from his upper half, intestines trailing between those parts like flimsy strings. The Yakuza leader tries lifting one of his arms, but it's pinned by a bunch of rubble. When he realizes his struggle is to no avail, he quits trying to pull it free. He resorts to using his other arm, hoping to restore himself. Except, Akatani won't let that magic trick work twice. He stomps on the Yakuza's wrist, pinning the arm down like its twin. A cry comes through the man's bloodied lips when he's given more agony. Those cries continue as the agonizing torture increases. More blood is spilled, from more than just the Yakuza's mouth. Like a flightless bird, he is devoured by the predator that waited for it on the ground. Akatani recalls the dove analogy that he told Toga. He compared themselves to the buzzards that rip at the flesh of the fallen. Now, he realizes the true vultures were the Yakuza. They were feeding off the remains of what they could to stay alive. In order for creatures like ghouls to survive, they must do more than live off of scraps. They must hunt. The ghoul feasts on what he's hunted. Its teeth gnash together as it swallows the flesh of the flightless Yakuza. Its tendrils cut and dig into that meat as though they're a set of utensils, slicing chewable pieces. The body of the man being eaten alive writhes but is unable to escape being devoured. All the end of a criminal generation can do is yell at the glassy sky above it, the looking glass fogging up as its vision of the future fades. Clouds as thick as ice covered the sky like a cooling blanket. The murky overcast cracks when it's struck by a streak of lightning. Jagged lines split the sky, slicing through the vapor like the ghoul's predatory organ that digs into the flesh of its quarry. A grey fog descends from above, no longer content with just drifting overhead. Not a single car splashes through the flooded streets. The rising water would be more suitable of a terrain for boats. Periodically, street lights gleam overhead, shadows dark and crisp in the flickering glow. The sound of emptiness hums with the dying bulbs, only to be disrupted by a loud gregarious boom of thunder. Himiko recognizes the view of it all. It's a night like the one she met Akatani during. It's right outside her window, rain tapping against the glass like someone knocking at the door to be let in. Her fingers trace the lines of water that trail down the window. To her, it looks like the sky is crying. The amount of tears is enough to flood the entire world. She feels something nuzzle against her bosom, snapping her out of it. When she looks down to see the culprit, she remembers where she is. Curled up in her lap is Akatani's illegitimately adopted sister. Akatani had asked her to watch the little girl while he went out. He brought her to his home to do so. She turns her head from the window to see the collection of books that are warmly lit. Having Eri pick out a bedtime story took so long that Himiko had expected Akatani to return by now. It's a bittersweet feeling. To be in his home with this sweet little girl. But without him. Speak of the devil, and he shall appear. She perks up when she hears the door unlocking. Who else but Akatani enters? The sound of his return rejuvenates all the energy that was drained for Eri to fall asleep. Akatani. Akatani. She cheers with delight as she bolts from Himiko's lap to her big brother. Himiko's laugh at the nickname the boy's little sister gave him hides the part of her that laughs in overwhelming relief. Did you miss me? Akatani wraps Eri in a hug so warm that you'd never suspect he'd come from the cloudburst outside. Without his mask, he's just a bright-eyed boy with an equally radiant smile. We both did, silly. Himiko joins in to make it a group hug. What kind of question is that? Akatani laughs, knowing that question is as rhetorical as his own was. Once the hug is over, he pulls away to take something out of his pants pocket. Thanks for watching, Eri. I've got something to pay you back for the trouble. He keeps sticking to find whatever it is he wants to give her in return for the favor. But Himiko holds her hands up in objection to stop him. She was no trouble at all. It was my pleasure. She insists when she sees he hasn't stopped digging. Seriously. I'll babysit anytime. For free. Even so. Akatani pulls something out of his pocket to give her. I wanted to thank you somehow. Himiko thinks it's money, until the fingers uncurl from his fist to reveal a few vials of blood instead. The blonde is shocked speechless, her mouth hanging open in a breathless gasp. I was only able to collect a little for you, but Akatani nervously scratches the back of his head when he sees her reaction, unable to read her emotions from it. It's the boy's turn to be dumbstruck when Himiko catches him off guard with a kiss on the cheek. She takes the vials from him during that moment of short-lived intimacy, before briskly heading for the door. Flushed red from overheating and embarrassment, Akatani's brain barely reboots in time for him to remember the weather Himiko is going into. Wait, the rain, but the blonde has already hurriedly made her escape. Standing in the middle of the doorframe, between his home and the hallway, he's amazed that she's completely erased her presence. Not even the ghoulish aspect of his quirk is able to detect her by scent. He briefly wonders if he should add the theory that she's related to the Ingenium family to her pages of his analysis notebooks. After brushing it off, he discards the thought and returns his attention to Eri. The little horned child has her head tilted to the side, white hair hanging, her attentiveness having watched the entire exchange evident. She blinks up at Akatani full of innocence. Are you and Big Sis gonna turn into my mommy and daddy now? But asks the furthest from innocent of questions. Short-circuiting for the second time that night in such a short span of time, Akatani has no other way to respond than a curt, time for bed. But unfortunately for Detective Namasa Tsukauchi, now was anything other than time for him to go to sleep. Despite the intense bags he's developed under his eyes, rivaling that of a raccoon's and Eraserhead simultaneously, he continues to read the tiny print of paper reports. Regardless of Makoto's constant badgering for him to get an eye exam, he refuses to wear glasses. He contemplatively rubs the stubble that's been growing itself out into a goatee, the lack of having time to shave, and what's occupying the space on his chin, also helping him to look more and more like Aizawa every day. The thought of growing out the hair on top of his head too in order to complete the look makes him shudder. The detective's office is as unorderly and unadorned as the man himself. A gooseneck lamp flickers with a dying bulb as it struggles to illuminate the stack of manila file folders varying in thickness. The swivel chair he's sitting in needs a new ball bearing as much as its occupant needs a break. Namasa's title stenciled on the frosted glass window of his office door would never allow vacation though. Instead, the detective works overtime trying to juggle both cases of the Yakuza and the Tokyo Ghoul. Little did he know he was about to receive a phone call from Eraserhead that would somehow end one of those investigations while making the other much more complicated. He answers on the third ring after considering just waiting for it to go to voicemail. "I don't have enough coffee in me for another one of your theories right now." Either the underground hero or the detective are accustomed to formalities such as saying hello when answering the phone, so Aizawa is quick to cut to the chase as well. "I wish all I had for you was a theory." The usual exhaustion in Eraserhead's tone leaks through the line, but it's accompanied by a sense of dread that unnerves Namasa. "Are you seated?" Already frustrated, Namasa slides his hand up from his stubble-covered chin and runs it through the hair on the top of his head instead. Forget growing it out. At this rate, his stress will give him a receding hairline. What does it matter? Just tell me. He grumbles just loud enough for Aizawa to hear him over the phone. But still, Aizawa doesn't relent. "You may want to sit down for this." The sound of rustling accompanies the underground hero's voice. "Yes. I'm sitting. Just tell me." Namasa finally snaps, having had enough. He notices from the corner of his eye that Sansa Tamakawa, his subordinate, is standing outside his doorway with a paper in hand. He holds up a single finger to signal for the cat-like officer to wait. After a brief pause, perhaps a moment of hesitation on Aizawa's part, the underground hero finally shares with the detective his reason for calling. The entire Yakuza has been massacred with an MO that looks like the Tokyo Ghoul. But no way of ripping that metaphorical band-aid off slow or fast would have ever been the right way to do so. What? Namasa abruptly shoots up straight in his swivel chair. The broken swivel chair. The one that needs a new ball bearing. The sudden movement is too much on it, putting it off balance and causing it to topple over. With its occupant. Namasa's butt collides with the floor, his tailbone taking the brunt of the fall. "Sir?" Tamakawa attempts to rush to his superior's aid having witnessed the blunder. However, he only makes it 2 strides into the office before Namasa is back on his feet with an outstretched arm, palm flat, to let him know he's okay. "Give me an address and I'll be right there." The detective runs around his desk and past Tamakawa faster than the officer with supposed cat-like reflexes was able to move. Once he's finished sliding his arms through the sleeves of his overcoat, he grabs its matching hat from the hanger. Sir," Tamakawa tries to insert himself between the detective and his frantic rush to the door. "Not now, Tamakawa. Save it for when I get back." Namasa brushes the officer off while literally brushing against their shoulder. If only he'd known Tamakawa was holding a fax from one of the patrol blimps about spotting an unusual character by the mask shop, maybe the detective wouldn't have been so dismissive. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me, and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.